Welcome to Behind the Investigation on Atlanta News First, where we take viewers and listeners behind the investigation, take them behind the curtain of our investigations. Joining me now is investigative reporter, my colleague, Ciara Cummings. How are you, Ciara?
I'm doing really well. Excited about the story.
Yeah, I'm excited about telling people more about this story. So it aired earlier this week, and it involves something that we heard about before, but this is a new twist, in my opinion. It's involving eminent domain, but instead of the government taking private land, it looks like private industry may end up with a landowner's property, right?
Yeah, at the approval of our state government. So internally, we kind of called this project Railroad It because it's about eminent domain via a railroad, or at least a construction project that would establish it in the city of Sparta. And Sparta is in Hancock County, so about 2 hours away from Metro Atlanta. But we wanted to profile this particular case because we have heard, just as you mentioned, eminent domain cases across the state, and it seemed like they were happening more frequently. This one had a little bit of a twist. Several families, they own hundreds and hundreds of acres. This particular family alone owns 600 acres, and there's this project that would be a 4.5 mile stretch to have a railroad. Just one problem: they need to run it through these people's property. The people don't want it, but the state says, you know what, this railroad company has the right to take your property, and we're giving them approval for eminent domain. So here's Railroad It.
Okay.
Driving across their nearly 600 acres
Yeah, you can see a lot of trees over there. You see the tops of them.
never gets old for Blaine and Diane Smith. The history just as rich as the timber crops they've been farming.
We used to go down there. It's a special rock that we like to sit on.
Blaine's enslaved ancestors lived and worked on this Sparta land. Now, he and his wife own the very property. The family among the less than 2% of black farmers nationwide.
My father farmed this land almost all of his life. My grandfather farmed it most of his life. He bought it back in the 1920s. During that time, he raised cotton, corn, peas, all kinds of vegetables. But it's still in the Smith family. Not one piece of it has gotten away.
Until this September. State leaders decided parts of the Sparta land are no longer theirs.
It's my property. You know, you don't have the right to take.
But a private company does have the right to take it, according to the unanimous vote from the Georgia Public Service Commission. The agency, comprised of 5 elected officials, oversees eminent domain. Eminent domain, the right of a government or its agent to appropriate private property for public use with payment of compensation. In Georgia, the process starts by first condemning the site. The Georgia PSC members agreed private company Sandersville Railroad could legally condemn 9 properties in Sparta, including parts of the Smiths, for the company's Hanson Spur project, a 4.5 mile spur connecting raw material producers to the CSX rail line in Hancock County. Essentially, hauling rocks that be used to build concrete. The company argues the train project will improve infrastructure. But the Smiths feel railroaded.
If you listen to the railroad folks, they say you're keeping your land. We're just taking a little piece of it. To me, we've got somebody who's coming through it like they are. They're devaluing it. They're defacing it. They're creating hazards through it.
They are just one of at least a dozen local eminent domain cases in recent years, from Atlanta to Newton County. Current statistics are few and fragmented, but Atlanta News First Investigates found nationwide data. A 2007 study revealed when eminent domain was used for private development, it most often impacted areas where more than half of the community was made up of people of color. Nearly half of the area's population sat below the poverty line. In the city of Sparta, where the developers are building the railroad, census records show 51% of residents live in poverty. The median income at $22,000.
You know, we're here in a county that really needs new opportunities, new job growth, new tax base.
The railroad company president, Ben Tarbutton.
Have an annual impact of $1.5 million.
Dollars that could make sense for a struggling town. It's how the company has pitched the project to residents. However, Georgia law states economic development is not a justifiable reason to take property.
It really is not supposed to be factored into an eminent domain case.
Well, they go hand in hand. I talk about jobs because that's what really matters to folks.
Tarbutton says the train would only travel one round trip per day, 5 days a week during daylight hours, that it would not be a nuisance to landowners.
They feel like you guys are robbing them of their family legacy, of their family land.
Well, you know, I understand that, and it's the condemnation process is a last resort. We have had multiple conversations with the landowners.
While several other property owners made deals with the company, 3 families are holding out, including the Smiths, in part over fears if they give up land now, the company could take even more.
Would you guys come back and take more land?
Well, I don't know exactly who you're talking to, but everyone I've dealt with that's a landowner, we've had very constructive dialogue.
So would you take more land if you needed it?
No, we're very clear.
A claim the Smiths don't believe.
Because when they come and take that property, it's gone forever.
It's why the Institute for Justice now represents the families against the railroad.
The railroad's position is just that I'm a railroad. Obviously, I'm going to benefit you, and that's just not enough.
The attorney filed this appeal in Fulton County Superior Court, alleging the PSC improperly granted Sandersville's petition that the project is not economically feasible and may not be a legitimate public use.
What the railroad has shown is that this track, if it even comes about, is going to promote the profits and the cost reductions for a couple of private companies, and that's all.
The Institute for Justice is using this as a money-making venture for themselves.
Hundreds of acres for 100 years and one single lineage. Altering it in any way is a price of progress that's just too high for the Smiths.
I go back to what my father said, keep the land. The land gives you respect, gives you respectability. Everybody around here knows that this is the Smith land down here.
Ciara, such a history with this family and their connection to this land. So it's now in the courts. Where does it stand right now?
Yeah, and what's so interesting about this, it's going to be fought in the court, but it's not technically a lawsuit. So essentially the PSC, which is right here in the city of Atlanta, they've made that decision. So now the Institute for Justice, on behalf of these families, is appealing that state decision, and they have to do so in Fulton County Court. So it's just an appeal, but as it stands right now, we're midway through December. There has not been a preliminary hearing scheduled in Fulton County Court for this case, but we really think we'll continue watching it no matter how long it takes, whether it's the coming months or coming years, because what the Institute for Justice is saying is that eminent domain is so controversial, and this is one of the more controversial cases because it's a private company alleging that they will be acting on behalf of the government. And the last time eminent domain was discussed on such a broad national stage was all the way back in 2005. The U.S. Supreme Court had a decision. It was so controversial. It was called the Kelo decision, which basically made eminent domain legal and private companies being able to act on behalf of state agencies. It was so controversial that 44 states, including Georgia, came up with their own local protections. And as we mentioned in the story, the local protection here in Georgia is that eminent domain, a justifiable reason for it, cannot be economic development. But you hear in this story, the railroad company is kind of pitching the project as economic development to the residents. So it'll be interesting to watch this one play out in Fulton Court and to see what happens there. And then should it work its way up through our state Supreme Court system and potentially all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court system.
How did you find out about this particular case? And also, you know, put in perspective of where this rail line would go through their property. Is it right smack in the middle? Is it the fringes? Give us some perspective.
So it's not right in the middle,
Yeah.
but essentially, yes, it would be dividing the family's land. It's fair to say it's not at the front of the land and it's not at the back of the land. It's a little bit in that in between. And so that's the point that some of these families, it's 3 families fighting this. They're like, you're kind of interrupting the property. Even if everything else was perfect,
Sure.
now I've got to cross over a railroad or wait for a train to come by to get to the rest of my property. So that's really interesting. And it's a 4.5 mile stretch. So it'd be going through hundreds of acres for 4 miles here. I forgot the other.
Yeah, how did you find out about this?
Oh, yeah. So this has been going on for several years. The family themselves got letters from that railroad president back in end of 2020 or 2021. And since then, they have been kind of talking to the railroad company, like, what are you trying to do with the property? Maybe open-minded to see like how massive the project was. And then when they learned how big of a scale it was and what they felt like was a negative impact on their property, that's when they got other people involved, including the Institute for Justice and Institute for Justice, which you know about. They have their own, team that's kind of investigating
Sure.
each case and letting news agencies know, hey, this is one of the cases we have taken on. And so that was kind of that follow through over the years. We've been getting alerts from these neighbors in Sparta about this project and basically them saying no to the railroad.
I got to give them credit, the railroad owner coming forward and making his case of why they should have this land. What's been the response to the story? Have they responded after the story aired? Did they provide any more additional information? Any other response from the public?
After the story aired, the railroad company did not provide additional information, but you saw he talked to us in that story, and we're grateful because there have been other stations that have covered eminent domain at large and even parts of this story, and they haven't gotten the railroad company's perspective. So we're very grateful they were willing to interview with us and give their perspective, and they're adamant that they're not going to come back for more land. They only want this section. And they said, we've tried to work with some of these homeowners, including the Smiths. It's just that it looks like we're at a standstill right now, so we're moving forward with that the process. But the reaction from the community has been massive. People are really frustrated. It's one of those topics that just gets the community going because you work so hard for a property or your home, and maybe you've got an emotional connection to it because maybe you're like the Smiths with the long lineage, an emotional connection to that property. So it's got an overwhelming feedback, and people largely on the side of the family.
Remind me, did you reach out to the Public Service Commission for an interview or any of the board members to give you a perspective of why they ultimately approve this?
Public Service Commission does not typically interview. We have like the essentially the documents and how they made their decisions. It's a 5-person panel, elected officials, and the PSC is over a lot of things in Georgia, not just eminent domain. And it seems they made their decision because they do feel like this can be, removing the economic development part from it, they feel like it can be an economically feasible project, and that could, in the end, help with infrastructure. Because he's saying we're going to haul rocks. Yes, we're doing them through private companies and a private railroad, but these rocks would go on to help build streets and roads. And so the PSC unanimously agreeing that we feel like this is an economically feasible project, but now it's kind of in the court system.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if they still would have made the same decision after your story and the public outcry. Ciara Cummings, thank you for breaking down this investigation. We appreciate you. And if you want to see more of Ciara's investigations, go to our website, atlantanewsfirst.com, or anywhere where you get your podcasts.